Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 5th of May of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about Kherson direction, where the Russians continue destroying and attacking the Ukrainian forces in the vicinity of the towns like Sloviansk, Sloviansk and so on. Furthermore, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians conducted a few attempts to attack the Ukrainian positions in the island, let's say by the name of this one, that's Nistriga, the island that, according to the head of the Ukrainian army, Syrsky, was captured during the previous few weeks. So the Russians were conducting their offensive, their attacks to regain control, or at least to establish some control over the main roads that goes to the area, but that attack was repelled by the Ukrainians. Furthermore, when talking just about the situation, about the area, we see that the Russians are using the same pattern as they used to use in the vicinity of Krynki, in the vicinity of the villages like Tyaginka. The Russians moved here already the Lancet drones squads, the Russians are moving here artillery forces, and of course the Russians have redeployed here the aviation with the purpose to use FABs against the Ukrainian positions in the towns like Izomys, Valentinska, Tomina Balka, Belozerka, and Kherson itself. So basically we're following the same situation as we used to see in Krynki. The Russians, as we understand, don't want to have the same things as they have right now in Krynki again. They try to reduce any possibilities from the Ukrainian side to redeploy their forces, to land their infantry and forces on the Russian bank of Dnipro River. So this is the situation on this direction. When talking about Krynki, more and more updates are coming that Ukrainians do have the foothold on the Russian side. Today we got additional video of how the Russians were flying above the area with FPV drones and were bombing the Ukrainian forces. On this video, for example, we can see the movements of Ukrainian soldier. This is it. The Ukrainian soldier was, let's say, revealed his own position and started moving from one building to another. Then we can see some equipment, a building with equipment, and the Russians were bombing this territory heavily. So we have more and more evidences, more and more updates that Ukrainians do have presence in this area. Currently, we don't know for sure how much of the territories is under Ukraine control, but some mappers are saying that the Ukrainians control almost everything from the beginning of the forest and deep further in the side of Kazachie Lahiri. So if we summarize everything we have, approximately this is the territory, this is the area of Ukrainian control. Of course, this is the significant control, and the biggest problem for the Russians is that currently it's spring. There are a lot of green things, leaves, grass, trees, and so on, which increase the possibilities for the Ukrainians to hide against the Russian FPV drones and many other things. So we understand that the Ukrainians are planning to move additional infantry, additional troops on this direction. Now we understand that the main difference between, let's say, of May and the summer campaign, spring and summer campaign of 2024, Kherson summer military campaign of 2024 differs from the military campaign of Kherson of autumn and the winter of 2023, is that the Ukrainians are planning to attack not just in the vicinity of Krynki. Most likely the Ukrainians are planning to do the same, to land their infantry, let's say, in front of Izomys and to try to establish control over something like this. And also the Ukrainians most likely are going to do the same in the village or town by the name of Vasilievka, this one. Today we got additional videos of how the Ukrainians were clearing the area using FPV drones, were attacking the Russian communication equipment, Russian radars, Russian, let's say, different positions and so on. And if we increase the numbers of dates since the beginning of May, we see a very big Ukrainian concentration of fire. Mainly the Ukrainians were attacking radars, communication, and different engineering equipment, electronic warfare equipment. So those were something like preparation before full-scale offensive operation that most likely is going to take place as soon as the Russians launch Kharkiv offensive operation. And and if the Ukrainians are able to establish control over Vasilievka, this is the best foothold for defense, because the Russians will not have significant, let's say, ways how to attack. They will not be able to attack from the north, from the south, because due to water barriers, and the Ukrainians will be able to hold this area for a very long time. The distance between Zmiyevka and Vasilievka is not so big. Using the fast boats, the Ukrainians would be able to redeploy additional reinforcements and reserves without any problems. Just electronic warfare equipment, just different engineering equipment, and everything will be fine if, of course, Ukrainians are planning to do something like this. Anyway, the Ukrainians are going to start another landing operation in Kherson. The question is when exactly and what kind of towns will be under Ukrainian attack. Now we're moving further to Велика Новоселовka, Vremevka tactical bridgehead. Today we got additional updates from the territory. If you remember, during the previous few days, most of the mappers have already updated their maps showing this territory of Urozhaina under complete Russian control. So if we summarize everything, every single barrack in the farm is under complete Russian control. So this is approximately the territory by the Russians. And today we got another video of how the Russians were trying to attack the Ukrainians, trying to bypass Urozhaina from the southeast and from the east. On this video we can see once again significant number of armored vehicles, tanks and personnel carriers trying to bypass the Ukrainian positions and to attack Ukrainians in Urozhaina from the east. Currently we don't know for sure whether the attack was successful or not, whether the Russians managed to achieve something or anything or not, but the most important is the destination and how the Russians were implementing. So the Russians were moving something like this, and the main target of the Russians was to get this intersection of the tree lines. So the Russians were trying to capture these tree lines, and from this area the Russians were planning to establish complete fire control over the northern, over the central, and of course over the southern part of Urozhaina. And after that the Russians would be much more easier for the Russians to move further from the farms to the north along the T0518 road. So that was the Russian plans. Those were the Russian plans. Furthermore, we got additional updates from Staromayorsk. So we see another videos of how the Russians were pummeling the area with multiple launch rocket systems. So we don't see, let's say, the big videos with flags. We don't see the, let's say, heavy clashes like we used to see in Avdiivka and something like this. But regarding these facts, we understand and we see that this direction is one of the primary directions for the Russians. Obviously they're going to move further. They are not using significant number of infantry and forces. Maybe up to 15,000 soldiers are concentrated on this direction, which is not so much, but anyway, this is enough to regain control over Staromayorsk, Urozhaina, and even to move further to the north and to capture once again Makarovka, Blagodatne, and to get the outskirts of Velika Novoselovka. And today we got another video from the village itself. The Russians destroyed the bridge. They were not destroyed, they damaged once again, or maybe that was the final attack, the final missile. Anyway, the Russians trying to reduce the Ukrainian logistic, and as a result of another missile strike, one of the roads that Ukrainians used for support and supply was also damaged or even maybe destroyed. So this is one of the primary targets for the Russians, and we see that the actions every day are intensifying. So it's like offensive. It's not something like, let's say, in Prichistovka. We are receiving almost every single day additional video of how the Russians destroyed another position. Maybe Prichistovka is something like concentration of forces hub that Ukrainians used to redeploy their forces either to Velika Novoselovka or to Ugledar. So that's why the Russians are pummeling the area heavily. So currently we don't know for sure, but we have a lot of updates from this territory as well. Ugledar, the Russians continue clearing the bank, the Ukrainian bank of Kashlygach River. Significant number of FPV drone strikes. The Russians were bombing Ukrainians, let's say, positions, machine gun positions, anti-tank positions, let's say radars, communications, equipment, FPV operator drones positions. So everything is like ongoing, but for now the question is when the Russians are planning to start the ground operation, because they're bombing this area. They've been bombing this area for probably previous 2 months, so it's like sooner or later this process should be finished. But for now the Russians are not in a hurry. Now we're moving to Novomikhailivka, Konstantinovka. Another day, another report that the Russians managed to enter Paraskoivka itself. We have different mappers update, we have different reports. For now, we still haven't received even a single geolocated confirmation, but 3 days in a row we've been receiving reports that the Russians have been entering the village. For now, without geolocations confirming this. When talking about the area between Pobeda and Konstantinovka, we see a significant number of videos of counter-artillery duels. The Russians maybe answered Paraskoivka, maybe they're planning to enter Konstantinovka, but of course we understand they can't do this, they can't complete this until they are cleared the fields against from Ukrainian artillery forces. Just after suppressing the Ukrainian artillery forces, the Russians will be able to start the ground operation. So in those days and during the previous 24 hours, the Russians were mainly concentrated exactly on that. Furthermore, the Russians, if they want to start any offensive from Pobeda to Konstantinovka, of course, they can't do this using this configuration. Before moving further to the south, we understand that the Russians need to improve their flanks and to at least capture something like this. Just with this control, the Russians do have good chances to finish Konstantinovka battle, because if the Russians start moving, let's say, without this area, the Ukrainians will counterattack the Russians, and some Russian squads can appear in an encirclement and in a cauldron. Konstantinovka, Krasnogorovka, as we discussed in the previous updates, the Russians established complete control over the industrial zone. This is significant, let's say, progress of the armed forces of Russian Federation. You know that currently the Russians control just 40% of the town, but when talking about the valuable areas, and because there are lots of blocks and some of them are valuable, some of them are not, so when talking about the number of valuable blocks that are under Russian control, we can say that the Russians control around 90%. The Ukrainians, we understand, controls the eastern part, the eastern fortifications, high-rise building, but as well we understand if the Russians are planning to move further and are going to move further to the north and the northwest, the value of the eastern part is going to be reduced till zero, because the Ukrainians will start abandoning their positions immediately and they will start running away. And according to geolocations we receive, as I understand, this is exactly what the Russians are planning to do, because the main focus we are receiving from the north and the northwestern part of the village, which confirms that it's the main primary target for the Russians. Furthermore, the Russians continue counter-artillery duels, and few more artillery positions, mortar positions were discovered by the Russians and destroyed. So everything is ongoing, most likely till the let's say till the 10th of May. We are not going to see anything. The Russians are not going to risk. They are not going to let's say waste their infantry before the victory day. But after victory day, I believe we're going to see let's say another full-scale attempt from the Russian side to penetrate the Ukraine defense belt and to capture entire Krasnogorovka. Nivoysk, as you can see, we have adjusted the map because we have the 100% confirmations that Ukrainians restore control, and this is now an explanation why the Russians still haven't managed to cut this artillery pocket, and why the Russians still haven't managed to establish control over the fields. And the thing is, the reason is that Ukrainians managed to somehow, as a result of some series of counterattacks, to restore control over Nivoysk. So that's why the Russians are still have a lot of things to do, but this is the thing they're doing right now, because we continue receiving updates from different mappers that the Russians started their movements something like this. So this is approximately the direction of Russian attack. So they're moving towards these two fortifications, these two strongholds. We got additional updates about further Russian progress inside of Nitailova. According to different mappers, if we summarize everything, this is approximately the territory that is currently under Russian control. So they bypassed the main street, they cut Yasnoborodovka from supply from the south, and the Russians are about to finish the battle for the Nitailova. There are still lots of things to do in the farms, 1-2 weeks, and after that the Russians will raise another flag. Now we're moving to Очеретино, Бердичи, Семеновka, Orlovka area. The Russians continue improving their positions. Different mappers continue updating their maps, showing additional Russian progress. So if we summarize everything from different sources, from different mappers, this is the Russian control between Orlovka and Umanska. As you can see, the Russians have reached the outskirts of the next defense belt, the most important one. If the Russians are able to bypass, then Umanska will follow automatically. We have additional improvements of the Russians between Solovyovo, Novobakhmutovka, Novoselovka, Persha. So this is approximately the area of Russian control on this direction. So the Russians are getting also closer and closer to the towns and settlements under Ukraine control. And the most important, today we got another Abrams tanks that was destroyed as a result of Russian fire. So 2 days in a row the Ukrainians are losing Abrams. Yesterday the Ukrainians lost Abrams and Bradley that the Ukrainians sent to evacuate damaged and destroyed Abrams. And today we got just Abrams destroyed by Lancet. So the 47th, as we can see, mechanized brigade is completely stuck and blocked in the area. And I'll remind you, just for letting you know, that most of the bridges in this area that goes from this let's say artillery pocket were already cut off by the Russians, and the Ukrainians don't have possibilities to evacuate armored vehicles and tanks. So everything that located in the pocket will stay in pocket, either destroyed by the Russians or say destroyed by the Ukrainians. Once again, I'll remind you that This is the water barriers that we have currently on the direction. Lots of lakes, lots of rivers, lots of water reservoirs that goes around this foothold. And there are a lot of, most of the Bradleys armored vehicles were here and they were destroyed here. The Russians have already destroyed the bridge in Umansk. The Russians have already destroyed the bridge between Skuchna and Mizhova. The only bridge that might left is in Novosilovka-Pershe, but something tells me that the Russians also destroyed that bridge. So the Ukrainians lost possibilities for evacuation of armored vehicles from here. So most likely during the next days we're going to receive more and more updates and pictures of destroyed Western weapon. Now we're moving to Ocheretino. We had a lot of updates as well. The Russians published the photo of control of Karlovka. The Russians raised another flag. So that video wasn't necessary because the Russians established the flag in Arkhangelsk. The Minister of Defense of Russian Federation today confirmed complete control over Ocheretino. So we see that we have adjusted the map and everything is, let's say, is ongoing, right? The only area we still haven't received any geolocations confirming Russian control is the fields between Novoalexandrovka and Ocheretino. So currently we know for sure what exactly is happening here, but already most of the mappers updated their maps showing additional Russian progress. And the most important, according to different mappers, currently the Russians either have already established control over this stronghold or the battle is about to start. We have some videos from the road between Novoalexandrovka and Arkhangelsk. Most likely the video is old, maybe 2-3 days ago, when the Ukrainians were trying to send additional reinforcement or to evacuate some soldiers, but armored vehicles were destroyed by the Russians or personnel carriers. And we have the video of how the Ukrainians were abandoning and leaving their positions from the north of Arkhangelsk. We will not watch the video because the video is very, very terrible and difficult to watch, so just explain to you. Personnel carrier arrived in the area and the Ukrainians were trying to, and the carrier was trying to evacuate soldiers, but they got under very heavy and very concentrated mortar fire, and as I understand, nothing good happened. This situation finished not good. So this is the situation in the area. Today is the, let's say, Orthodox Easter, so most likely we're not going to receive significant updates from the directions. The Russians will try to hold their positions, to dig in deeper, to clear the area, but we got a lot of interesting updates from the Ukrainian sources. I would like to point your attention to the icons, blue icons of FPV drone strikes, and these icons tell us a lot. And the most important, these icons tell us about supply roads that the Russians using for redeployment of forces. And if we take a look at the map, we're going to see that there is one support road that goes from Yasinovate and then further to the north in direction of Novobakhmutovka, and this is the first supply road that the Russians use, and we see a certain Ukraine FPV drone control. The second supply road goes also, let's say, through Yasinovate, then to Avdiivka, then along the railways to Ocheretino. So this is the second supply road that the Russians use, and we see the Ukrainians have a certain focus on this territory as well. And the third supply road goes from, let's say, Spartak, Peski, Veselaya, Peski, and then to Pervomayska. So based on these geolocations, we can make a conclusion. About the further Russian plans. When talking about the Peski, this concentration of fire, everything is clear to us. The Russians are planning to finish with the salient, with this artillery pocket, with Nitailova, so that's why they are sending additional reinforcement using this road. When talking about Ocheretino, we understand that, as we discussed in the previous videos, most likely the Russians are planning to continue the bloom of Ocheretino flower. They will move to Progress. The Russians will move to Sokol. The Russians will move further to Novoalexandrovka, and the Russians, of course, will try to attack the Ukrainians in Kalinovo. So that's why we see significant concentration of fire on the supply road that the Russians used to bring additional reinforcement. The thing that, let's say, surprised me, not surprised, but I had more questions than the answers, is the Russian supply road that goes from Yasinovate further to Novobakhmutovka, Alexandropol. So we see also concentration of fire, and this concentration tells me, I can make a conclusion based on that, that most likely the Russians, after the 9th of May, are going to start offensive in direction of this stronghold and in direction of Alexandropol. So the Russians have already secured their flank in Ocheretino, Arkhangelsk, and Novokalinovo. Most likely Kalinovo is going to fall as well, and after that the Russians will have possibilities and very good chances to attack the Ukrainians in the towns like Alexandropol, Politimonovka, Valentinovka. So the Russians will try to capture this territory, and if they are able to do this, of course this is going to be the big end and collapse of Ukrainian positions in New York, and New York most likely the Ukrainians will be forced to abandon. So this exactly I think the Russians are going to do. It's very close to the Russian positions, very close to the Russian artillery support, because to move further, let's say from Ocheretin in direction of N32, there are high risk of getting very far from the main Russian artillery positions and just to stay without any support. So that's why I think that to attack closer to the main Russian land is better solution for the Russians when talking about the reducing of losses. So this exactly I think is going to happen. Now we're moving to Bakhmut-Artyomovsk direction. The sources reported that the Russians have concentrated 25,000 soldiers. Few months ago we were talking about 40,000 soldiers, now 25, so the numbers have varied from months to months. I'm not sure that this is connected with the losses, it's just maybe not the correct data or numbers. Anyway, today we got another day, another reports about the clashes in the eastern part of Chasiv Yar, but yet we haven't received even a single geolocation confirming the Russian presence there. Of course, I believe that there are very heavy clashes. The Russians are trying to storm, but also another option that those reports were just rumors and attempts to distract attention and to force the Ukrainians to start panic or something like this. Because for now, no updates from the eastern Chasiv Yar. But the same story we used to see in Ocheretin, Arkhangelsk, and by some day everything was colored by Russian color because everything were collapsed and so on. Anyway, the clashes continues. The same story are taking place in Klishchevka. The Russians made more attempts to attack towards the rich network of fortifications that located to the northwest and the west of Klishchevka. Most of those attacks were repelled by the Ukrainians, but anyway, we see that the Russians currently are very focused on this direction. Very important updates are coming from Sloviansk, the heart of Donbas Arc operation. We have the information reports that the Russians conducted massive missile strike on the Ukrainian, let's say, Sloviansk power plant. The power plant was damaged once again or destroyed. Currently, we don't know for sure the status of the power plant, whether it was operating by today or not, so it was like a warehouse or something like this. We don't know for sure, but the only thing we know for sure is that there were explosions. Up to 10 explosions were heard in Mykolaiivka, and most of the sources, most of the Telegram channels, I believe you are familiar with them, start saying that the Russians attacked another energy facilities object and many other things connected completely just with energy facilities and so on. But today, one Russian sources published very interesting report about the redeployment of the French Foreign Legion on the territory of Ukraine. And according to information we have, the first squad of around 100 soldiers was redeployed in Sloviansk, exactly in this area. And the main purpose of them is to support and help the forces of 54th Mechanized Brigade, to support them with artillery, to support them with repelling Russian attacks on Bilogorovka and many other things. And also, according to the article, the France is going to send 1,500. 100 have been already sent. Another 1,400 are about to arrive in this area. And so, if you ask my opinion, if we connect these two updates, most likely the Russians were bombing and attacking the temporary positions of the French Foreign Legion, exactly in the Mykolaiivka power plant. As you can see, we have added the soldier new unit. We used to have just the Ukrainian soldiers on Ukrainian flag, Russian flag, and now we will start adding the forces with the France flag, which confirms the presence of France on the territory of Ukraine. And this is the first confirmed, let's say, area with the presence of the French troopers on the territory of Ukraine. So these guys are going to help Ukrainians in Verkhnyokamyanska, Bilogorovka, maybe Vyimka, so to protect Siversk. Their main purpose is to protect Siversk. When talking about Siversk direction, we don't have anything additional, just the regular activity, FPV droning of Ukrainian positions, supply support, the bombings of the railways between Vyimka and Berestova, and of course the bombings of the strongholds, positions, shelters on the hills in the vicinity of Bilogorovka, where the Russians tried to suppress the positions of 81st Air Mobile Brigade of the Armored Forces of Ukraine, for now without any progress. South in Kupiansk direction, we have just one video confirming the Ukrainian control over the tree lines that a week ago used to be under Russian control, but now the Russians are bombing this area, which also confirms the Ukrainian presence there. Central Kupiansk direction, we have no updates from the territory, and the most important interesting updates are coming from the north in Kupiansk direction, and the first video we got from Stelmakhovka. On this video we can see another Russian attempt to attack, successful one. The Russians were attacking the Ukrainian tree lines, and basically they captured the area and space right in front of the village. The next attack is the entering of Stelmakhovka itself, but there are a few important things that I would like to point your attention. The first is that the Russians were using the not armored vehicles, tanks, and different things. The Russians were using Golf cars, just light Golf cars that Russians received from China. And this is something new that we start seeing during the special military operation, that the Russians currently are moving in direction of the light vehicles, very light vehicles like motorcycles, like Golf trucks, because they're very cheap. You can build them a lot. If this truck light vehicle is damaged, you can keep it on the surface. You don't need to evacuate this, because if one destroyed, then China will send you 100 to replace it. So now the Russians are moving to the flexibility, to be more mobile, flexible, and faster, because as I understand, this is, according to the Russian military doctrine, is the key benefits to win this special military operation. Of course, rocket, missiles, drones as well, but to be flexible, mobile, and the most important, fast, is also the key, let's say, characteristics that the Russians need to have if they want to break through big distances, to be faster than Ukrainians, to be much faster than Ukrainians. And now we're moving further to Kislovka-Kotlarovka. Most of the mappers have already adjusted the map, showing the village under complete Russian control. So now we have no doubts, but the western Kislovka still remains under Ukraine control. We got additional videos of how the Russians were fabbing the area. It's 5th of May. Most likely the Russians will capture the rest of Kislovka before the victory day. Maybe not, but anyway, they're going to do something like this. North in Kupiansk direction, we have received very interesting report from Dvorechna, and this is very important update that I would like to point your attention. We have the satellite photo of the fire anomalies. As you can see, there was a very big fire in the vicinity of Dvorechna. There is a very big forest. This one, you can see this forest very good from the satellite pictures, and the entire forest was set on fire. Maybe the Russians burned the fire with those flamethrower systems, maybe just because of weather, or maybe the secondary detonation of some ammo that were left in the forest during the regrouping or something like this. But this is not the only video of fire anomalies. The second fire anomaly we are receiving from the vicinity from Liman. So Liman, Yarovo, Svetogorsk, Studenak, the towns that some once were under Russian control. And we also see a very big fire, and the fire is growing, and we see that fire have already covered most of the forest in the area, and this is very important. And the importance of this is that if the current weather is very hot, the weather is very hot, and the summer is going to be very hot. And as I understand, due to these things, most likely the story of Kremenная forest is going to be resolved. Currently, we can't know for sure who will resolve, but who will set the forest on fire before the Russians or the Ukrainians will get initiative and will win the battle for the foothold, because the weather is very hot, and it's not a very big problem to set this forest on fire, and basically nobody, either the Russians nor the Ukrainians, will have possibilities to, let's say, to resolve the situation, and the entire foothold can be burned, and which will allow either the Russians or the Ukrainians who have the initiative to break through the Ukraine to the defense belt and to capture additional territories. So most likely something like this is going to happen in the direction. Now we're moving to Kharkiv. The Russians continue bombing the Ukrainian forces. On this video we can see the concentration of Ukrainian soldiers, maybe FPV drone operators, maybe some, I don't know, artillery forces or something like this, but the Russians discovered them, and as a result of Iskander strike, the group was covered and destroyed. A little bit to the southwest, the Russians discovered the Ukrainian radar, air defense radar, and as a result of another strike, the radar was also destroyed. So the Russians continue preparation of Kharkiv offensive operation. Most likely soon this operation is going to start after the 9th of May. We have some updates, political, let's say, way more and more talks about the redeployment of French troops on the territory of Ukraine. Let's say, creditors will demand from Ukraine to resume payments on the national debts for the first time since the beginning of the war. This is not very good piece of news for the Ukrainians. And so this is the situation. Zelensky is a predicament in the war against Russia opinion. So the situation is very difficult for Ukraine, and this summer is going to be obviously decisive and vital for both sides, and so we'll see what is going to be next. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.